线长山又高，处处港口都险要。
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Strait Talk, where we dive deep into the Taiwan Strait, a pivotal frontline of the battle between Western hegemony and Eastern resistance, bringing you a perspective of Taiwan, mainland China, cross-strait relations, and beyond, not typically covered by Western mainstream media. Today, I have the one and only Jing on my show. After many years of working together and being a guest on her show, and considering her a friend of mine, hope you feel the same way about me.
Well, depends.
Really? It still feels very surreal to be over here in Beijing doing this live with you. So why don't you say hi to the audience and introduce yourself to them?
Thank you so much. So glad to meet all of you. And thank you so much, Xiangyu. I consider you as my friend as well. I mean, we've been talking to each other online in the past 2 years, but so great that you're actually in Beijing. Mm-hmm. Who'd have thought that we can meet in Beijing? I mean, such an honor to welcome you here.
Yeah, thank you. Feel very welcomed already on the mainland. It's very great to be back over here after, I think, 4 years. Yeah, and then doing my conscription, I couldn't leave Taiwan for a while. So I know in the past, we talked about how you became determined to show the world a different perspective of China after anti-China hysteria was ramping up, which is why your journalism shifted towards being more political from being just a little bit more on the cultural side. So can you talk a bit about what that was like?
So I've been working as a journalist in China for more than 10 years, 11, 12 years, I think. And being a journalist has always been my dream since childhood. I've studied journalism in China and in the United Kingdom. So after graduation, I've always been working in English media in China. So I think in the past a decade, I have been focusing on how to tell stories from China to people outside of China, to the English-speaking audiences. But as you mentioned, in the beginning, I was more focusing on cultural stuff, people's story, interesting story. And in the past few years, I became very political and also very active on social networks. As you have noticed that in Twitter, in YouTube, I became very active. And there are some cases, some turning points that led up to this decision. I think one major turning point is the riots in Hong Kong in 2019. That's a horrific year to Chinese people. But then what's more horrific is the outright lies on Western mainstream media. What they portrayed on CNN, on several Western mainstream media, are completely the opposite of what really happened on the ground. And it wasn't just me saying this. A lot of friends of mine, either Hong Kong locals, either expats living in Hong Kong, were saying the same thing. They were seeing one thing happened in front of their apartments in their community, and then when they go back home, turning on television, they see completely different stories on CNN. So, that gave me a lot of anger. So I think, as a journalist, I can tell the stories myself. As a Chinese, I can tell our stories to audiences out of China. And another thing is, in the beginning of 2020, the coronavirus broke out. Yes. The pandemic broke out.
Yes.
So I was the reporter who was sent to Wuhan, the city that was under lockdown, to report what really happened during the lockdown. So I spent there, I think, almost 3 months during the lockdown, interviewed patients, survivors, doctors, nurses. And I saw how heroic everyone in the city was. They were pulling together to defeat this once-in-a-lifetime, this struggle. But then I think that was the peak of racism towards Chinese people or Asian people in general.
Yes.
Right? You would see all kinds of racist terms, lies, targeting Chinese.
Random attacks on people who simply look Chinese.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the point. I was like, okay, I need to speak up for myself. I need to speak up for me as a Chinese, speak up as a journalist who was on the ground, knowing and seeing what's really happening. Don't let those so-called correspondents speaking on behalf of us and telling people lies. So realizing how many lies and how some media twisting the realities in China was the reason that made me became like very active on social networks.
Right. It's kind of similar to my experience. I've always followed politics, but I haven't really been vocal in the English-speaking world. But as tensions between the US and China heightened, people started using the topic of Taiwan more and more, which really angered me because to me it didn't seem like they really cared about the well-being of the people on Taiwan, but were simply interested in using us as a wedge against the Chinese mainland. And I felt that to be disrespectful, not just towards the people on Taiwan, but towards all Chinese people on both sides of the strait. And unfortunately, even a lot of people who are friendly towards China don't really understand a lot of the nuances about Taiwan that I just happen to be familiar with. So I decided if I don't speak up and share a different perspective and let people come to their own conclusions after hearing more sides of the story, who else will? I mean, hopefully more and more people will share different perspectives than the ones that are just shared in Western mainstream media. So I think that is probably why you approached me a few years ago to speak on these issues and why we click so well. Yeah, so on the topic of, rising anti-China sentiments, the one question I have for you is, I mean, it seems obvious that this fearmongering has to do with China's rising economic independence and overall formidability. And a huge part of that is, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative. As you know, when people talk about the BRI, China is often accused by the US of engaging in dead trap diplomacy and doing to smaller countries what the US elites have done to China. So they consistently frame it as China attempting to subjugate smaller countries. Now, you recently visited France, Serbia, and Hungary to report on President Xi Jinping's official visit to these countries. And during your trip, you engaged quite a bit with locals. I don't know how much of the official statements from these governments you heard while there, but how do you feel the perspectives of the people and leaders of France, Serbia, and Hungary inform our understanding of the reception of the BRI in these countries?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's like two questions. First, how some European countries see China, the reception is like. Second is the BRI, right?
Yes.
So for the Europe trip, I think France and China is easing their tensions like that existed several years ago. And now both sides, I mean, especially Emmanuel Macron, he emphasized the strategic autonomy for France. So basically, France is trying to find a way to not be so reliant on the United States, or their foreign policies shouldn't be dominated by the United States. So I think that's a good sign. So when we were there, I think the public was quite welcoming us there. Of course, among the public, because of in the past few years, the media warmongering and the demonization, people have mixed feelings about China. But most of the mixed feelings, negative feelings about China comes from the disinformation and the information war that some Western governments have launched against China. They will mention about, how about the human rights? How about that? Or China is not safe. But in general, I think they treated us really well. And Hungary and Serbia, I mean, they have always been good friends of China. They are also participating countries of BRI. And I think having these countries in BRI countries will be a very positive thing for Europe in general. And that leads up to the BRI. I think BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, will be a game changer for Eurasia. Not just Asia, Eurasia. Personally, I think BRI, this project is so impressive. It has a lot of potential for developing nations, and it's important for whole Eurasia to achieve peace, to achieve economic development. But before I go into the details of BRI, I want to tell our viewers something how American politicians say about BRI, because I took a pad because I took a note because just 2 days ago, as before we were recording this, at this hearing, a U.S. politician, his comment on BRI, says a lot about how the U.S. government sees BRI. So this is, I took a note so I won't misread anything. But this is, he said this at this House Select Committee on CCP. I think you know that, a very anti-CCP project. So they hosted a hearing on May the 16th. And one of the witnesses who gave testimony at this hearing is called Daniel Round. Daniel Roundy? He's the senior vice president at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So at the hearing, here's what he says about the BRI, and I will read his quotes. Well, he said, in the area of great power competition, the U.S. need an alternative solution rather than demanding that developing nations cease working with the CCP. We can't fight something with nothing. Well, what he says so far is right? Mm-hmm. And then he mentioned that there's some hard truth to face. CPC, he used CCP, but we call it CCP. He said the hard truth to face is CCP is the go-to financer and builder of infrastructure in the developing world. We don't have to meet China dollar for dollar, but we must be a better infrastructure investment partner. And listen to what he says next. BRI is an ambitious and hopeful project that speaks to the aspiration of China's friends and potential friends. And then he said, I hate it because it's a great idea, because it inspires folks in the global south. It's just not our idea. See, he said a lot of the compliments about BRI. He thinks it's a great idea, it's ambitious, it helps developing nations, it helps the global south. But I hate it so much because it's the idea that we didn't come up with this idea. That speaks a lot of how the U.S. government sees this. And remember, listeners, viewers, like friends, comrades, and whatever you heard about BRI, about China, one motive is the huge information war that the U.S. Congress sponsored. U.S. passed this Countering Chinese Influence Act, and basically spend $500 million US every year to sponsor negative news coverage on China, particularly on the Belt and Road Initiative. And how do they sponsor that? They allocate that $500 million US to different countries through their local embassies to finance the so-called independent journalists, to finance some media trainings. So each story this so-called journalists wrote, they will be rewarded like $1,000 US project. And this story has been verified by local media in like African nations. Like a few years ago, Zimbabwe newspaper, The Herald, did a coverage. They did an investigation how U.S. embassy in their countries organized this so-called workshop, training investigative journalists, independent journalists, and then turns out they just train these journalists to write negative stories about China's investments in their countries. See, that's why you've been hearing so many negative information, and even the U.S. politicians acknowledge BRI is such a good idea, but we don't like it.
This statement alone kind of flies in the face of the claim that China is trying to engage in debt trap diplomacy. And I think such allegations and accusations towards China is quite disgusting because, when I was in Chengdu, I visited the Railroad Protection Monument. And for those who don't know, in 1911, the Railroad Protection Movement was a movement in protest to the Qing government attempting to nationalize the railway, not for the benefit of the people, but so that they could pass the control over to foreign powers like Great Britain, France, Germany, and the United States, because China was heavily indebted to these countries back in the late Qing dynasty, and these countries had a lot of pull on the Qing government who was facing a lot of pressure both from within and without. And the Chengdu Hankou Railway was one of the few railways in China at the time not under control of foreigners, and they were trying to take that away from us. So what they're accusing China of doing, they've done to us in the past.
Yeah. Same old strategy, same old tactics. When they cannot compete, they just came out with outright lies to demonize you. So, I mean, that's what they're good at.
Right. So what do you think was China's motivation for visiting three countries right at this time?
I think after what happened in the past few years, some European countries realize following U.S. leads or it's not really beneficial to them. They just cannot decouple from China's market. I think since this year, German's Chancellor Scholz visited China, and also Macron lead several French companies to visit China. So economically, they just cannot decouple from China. And if they really follow U.S. orders, it's just hurting themselves. So maybe these countries are also having second thoughts on seeking strategic autonomy. And Serbia, they are the victim of NATO, of the U.S. Imperialist goals as well. So they have been China's friend all the time. And Hungary is the same. Hungary has the largest, for example, Huawei's company. They have the largest Huawei battery company in Hungary. So they are the participating countries of BRI. So it's beneficial to their economy. So it's understandable these countries want to have better relations with China. And I think this is a good sign for this whole Eurasia to seek strategic autonomy for themselves.
Right. So you're pretty optimistic about the trajectory that these countries are going towards in their relation with China.
Well, how to say? Well, we will see what will come out later.
Right,
but at least both sides are.
There are signs that they are reconsidering some of their previous options.
Of course, we are not naive that things will just we will be BFF forever. Things will be good. No, I think it's just see what's in the best interest for yourself is good enough, rather than follow others' orders. And yeah.
Since my show is called Straight Talk, we can't escape from cross-strait issues.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to connect with all of this is, do you see any parallels between the fear-mongering and politics over the BRI with the cross-strait service trade agreements back in 2013, 2014 with the mainland and Taiwan?
Of course. I mean, we talk about this many times. And there are a lot of similarities. So in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in the world, it's the U.S. launched such a massive information war and economic war. Oftentimes, I talk to people who have never come to China or the mainland. Everything they mentioned is very negative things. Most of the negative things are not true. For example, when I go to the North America or Europe, ask people, what's your thought on China? They're afraid of China. They're afraid of going to China because they just know nothing. They have no sources to get information from China. And of course, the only source is their own media. But their own media portray China in a very almost completely negative way. I talked to a professor in Paris. He's a professor in political science. He said, the thing is, even though like we Parisians, we French, very critical thinking, but the thing with the reports on China is completely negative. You can see nothing positive on the media about China on their media coverage. So, I mean, that forms a fear among the people. People are not willing to visit China. China is a mystery. It's an evil mystery. So, and some of them blame, well, maybe because China, you're just weak in soft power. But then, soft power, you know how many Confucius institutes overseas have been closed because they think this Confucius Institute is like a cultural center where local people can learn Chinese language, can learn Chinese culture. But then those cultural centers have been demonized as spy centers, as agent centers. So many countries under the pressure close down their institute. So then people have no chances, no ways to learn Chinese language, no way to learn Chinese cultures, and have no contact with Chinese people, not willing to visit China. So this isolation created fear.
Right.
Well, it's a void. It's a void. Then will people just speculate anything horrible? So that's the feeling I get from people because of the demonization, because of fear mongering. Another thing I think hilarious is, when I first became very vocal on Twitter, I just post random photos that I took when I was doing interviews, doing stories across China. I posted some photos that I took in Tibet Autonomous Region, beautiful skies, beautiful people laughing, skies are blue. A lot of viewers on Twitter immediately share those photos because they have never seen those positive photos. Just blue skies, clouds, people laughing, just chatting, eating. They have never seen such positive photos anywhere. Every time they see photos about China, it's just gray, negative. Western journalists have a way to take photos to make you the most evil. They pick the strangest angle to make you look like an evil person.
Right.
And they won't take photos on sunny days. Only cloudy days, rainy days, or smoggy days. So everything is gray. Of course, with this fear mongering, people outside of China were only afraid of China.
Right.
When I go to Hong Kong, and haven't been to Taiwan yet, but I watched many interviews, box pops. Have people ask random pedestrians on the streets of Taiwan, how do they feel about China? And it's the same thing. It's the same talking points that Western media have been throwing at them. They know nothing about them. And then if you ask people from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, who have actually been to mainland, if you ask foreigners who have actually traveled to China, they will tell you a completely different stories. So I think this fear mongering of this information war is working. It's just create a fear among the people. So you will no longer be interested in understanding China.
Because without these fear-mongering campaigns, I feel a lot of people are either going to be indifferent towards China or they're going to be curious about the culture, whether it be language or whatever, because it is a very different culture than from the culture in the West. And if you look at it without these from a non-political lens, it is just another civilization, and it's different. It's got a very long history. It's got, interesting foods. Different regions have different local traditions. It's a good place for bridge building, and like the Confucius Institutes, whatever you think of them, they do introduce Chinese culture and language, and a lot of people, because of contact with the culture and language, want to understand more about China, and then they come over here and then they have an understanding of China that they see with their eyes. But one thing I like to tell people is the people today who are telling us how China is terrible, is this very scary prison society, they're the same people who told the American people that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and we all know now that it is false. So if you don't believe what they tell you about other things, maybe you should come see China with your own eyes. And I think with the fear-mongering campaign over 2014, they had to really put that on another level, because between Taiwan and the mainland, we already share a common language, we share a common culture. So without the fear-mongering, most people at some point, whether it be because of work or whatever, it's really easy for us to come over here. And once you come over here, you find out that a lot of the propaganda surrounding the mainland is false. My ex, she visited the mainland with me back in 2019. And, she's a little bit more on the other side politically, as are many of her friends. But then after she came, her friends asked her, how was it? Was it fun? And she was like, oh yeah, it was very fun. And some of her friends thought I had brainwashed her. But that's not really... When we still disagreed on a lot of things, and it's fine. I didn't really tell her what to believe about things over here. You know, she just saw things with her own eyes and told her friends that she had a good time. And some of her friends were kind of concerned about that. Now, going back to 2014, I think it's a very significant year because that is the year of the Maidan coup in Ukraine. It was also the year of the Umbrella Revolution, or the Umbrella Color Revolution in Hong Kong, or the Umbrella Movement. And it was also the year of the Sunflower Movement in Taiwan. Now, for those who don't understand, the Cross-Strait Service Trade Agreement was signed between Taipei and Beijing back in 2013. But it was never ratified in Taiwan because of the protests in 2014, which on the surface was a protest against the lack of transparency surrounding the trade agreement. But from what I saw, most of it was really just paranoia over mainland China's potential to economically dominate Taiwan. But before this Sunflower Movement, cross-strait relations between Taiwan and the mainland, and I think you can attest to this, were at their peak. And people were pretty optimistic about better relations being good for Taiwan's economy. I mean, the leader of Taiwan at the time, Ma Ying-jeou, ran on a campaign of better relations with the mainland to boost Taiwan's economy. And when he got into office, he started taking steps to make travel between the two sides easier and allowed mainland travelers to Taiwan much more easier access to tourism in Taiwan. But this fear-mongering campaign really marked the beginning of the end of relatively positive relations, and the relations have only gotten worse ever since Sino-US relations began deteriorating over the 2010s. I mean, I think around that time, there were valid concerns among some of the people, and it could have been a very good time to discuss the merits of free trade, especially since when it comes to free trade with Taiwan, the mainland has a history of giving Taiwan very favorable terms that don't really make economic sense if you're trying to economically dominate Taiwan. And it would have been a good time to show how America's foreign policies are in fact much closer to the West's portrayals of China's policies. But instead, 2014 was just a bunch of fear-mongering. So, I mean, as you can see, the relations between the two sides went from relatively positive to very negative in a very short amount of time, which shows how volatile politics in Taiwan can be. And they're heavily determined by electoral cycles and NGO activities. So I therefore believe building bridges between the people on both sides of the strait at a grassroots level is very crucial for better relations between the two sides. So what actions do you think young Chinese people from Taiwan and the mainland can take to bridge this gap? And additionally, how can individuals like us reporting to foreign audiences contribute to building these bridges?
I think you mentioned something very important. It's really the future of the relation at the cross-strait relations or the relations among different countries in the world really depends on the young generations. And I think one good thing about the young generations is they are open-minded. They are willing to accept new things. First, I want to tell how mainlanders feel about Taiwan.
Right.
You know, I was born and raised in the mainland. And we always consider people in Taiwan as our families, as our friends. And this has been, I mean, we know this since we were kids. I can give you many examples. Many beautiful stories about Taiwan have been written in elementary textbooks for decades. When I was a elementary school student, I learned about 日月潭.
Sun Moon Lake.
Sun Moon Lake? So 日月潭, I mean, it's still in the first grade of elementary school, like 语文, the Chinese textbooks. It's telling the kids, you know, how beautiful 日月潭is. It's in the central of Taiwan and it attracts tourists, domestic and international tourists every year. So we all want to visit 日月潭with this dream of visiting Taiwan, visiting 日月潭 in the future.
Very big lake surrounded by forests.
Yeah, we learn how beautiful it is. And, a famous poem that we all know, we can recite it very well, is 乡愁, written by Taiwan poet. So what's the word?
Poet?
Poet. Taiwan poet, Yu Guangzhong. It's 乡愁. Well, I mean, it's
Longing for home.
Yeah, he cannot meet his mother, his wife, and then eventually, after his mother passed away, he still cannot meet her. And I recite this poem in multiple occasions. It carries so much deep feelings of one longing for going back home, which is the mainland, and meeting his families. And that's the stories, resonate with a lot of people cross streets. So, and another poem I think is still being taught on the second grade Chinese textbook in the mainland elementary schools is we welcome 欢迎台湾小朋友. It's called 欢迎台湾小朋友. We welcome
kids from Taiwan.
Yeah. So, we have always considered friends, people in Taiwan as our families. And we're looking forward to the day that we are reunified when we're ready to welcome you. And this is in elementary school textbooks. I think even just last year, Harbin in Heilongjiang province became such a popular tourist spot in the winter. And one popular video on Douyin is several tourists from Taiwan visited Harbin. And one of the local guy, asked tourists, "Where are you from?" And the three women said, "Oh, we're from Taiwan." And the guy from Harbin said, "Oh, you're from Taiwan? You're from Come on, get this free food, free drinks. Give all the food and delicious food for free. Just come see our hometown." So there's such enthusiasm and this welcome to families and friends from Taiwan is deeply rooted in our minds. So this is how we feel about people in Taiwan. Where were we? I know I'm being so off the topic right now, but
so it's what do you think the young people on both sides of the strait can continue bridging the gaps on a grassroots level, because politics in Taiwan are so volatile? So
I think one of the reasons that young people in Taiwan don't feel related to Chinese culture, don't feel related to the mainland, is because of the isolation, because of the lack of information, lack of knowledge. Like you mentioned, I think in our conversation, you mentioned at a certain point, you feel like there's a change of all the curriculum. There's a change on textbooks. Sadly, there's no information, no TV dramas from the mainland even. So with no information, how can you get to know the other side? However, we know the information from Taiwan very well because we grew up listening to the songs of Taiwan singers. We watch TV dramas from Taiwan. We watch like TV shows, 综艺节目 from Taiwan. So we are very familiar with all this information. So we never feel the culture in Taiwan as strangers. So I think we need this flow of information. So I sincerely invite a lot of young people from Taiwan, come to the mainland. Come to mainland either to travel or to study and talk to local people. Make friends with the local people. Only by talking to local people can you really understand what they think, what the real culture is. And I think another thing is whenever you go to a different place, be open-minded. So remove the bias, remove what the media have been telling you. Remove all this bias, stereotypes, and see these places with your own eyes. Talk to the people to try to understand from their perspectives. Why I mention that is, I feel a lot of Westerners, foreign correspondents, when they come to China, some of them are based in China, but they still read all the horrible negative stories about China. One thing is they never try to understand how we look at things, how our culture is. They are being quite arrogantly trying to understand from their perspective. For example, when I was in Xinjiang a few months ago, there was a correspondent group basically a group of reporters from different international media organizations. They were invited to visit Xinjiang and see things for themselves. So one time we were in a community office, like basically how the CBC deputies help citizens solve things. There's this like a community office, and there's a library. And I saw on the library, in the Western media, people say the language of Uyghur people are forbidden in Xinjiang. That's what Western media have been telling people. But then on the library and the bookshelves, I see Uyghur language magazines, and I see a Quran in Uyghur language, in Arabic language. So I took some of the photos, a Uyghur language magazine, I took a photo, and then one of the foreign correspondent approached me and asked me, oh, it's so rare to have this Uyghur language books, right? I told her, no, it's quite common. Don't you see? I have actual magazines, weekly magazines in Uyghur language, and this printed copy is in front of you, and you're still thinking Uyghur language books is so rare. So they have this bias deeply rooted in their mind. Even with solid proof right in front of their eyes, they still thinking Uyghur language is being repressed. But Uyghur language is not being allowed in the public. But the book is right there. So they are not quite open-minded. So I encourage young people from Taiwan or from other countries, when you come visit the mainland, when you visit any other countries, be open-minded and trying to understand from their perspective rather than understand through what the Western media have been telling you.
Right. I certainly went through this process. When growing up, I was never for Taiwan separatism, but of course my understanding of the government over here on the mainland was heavily skewed towards the other side for a while. But it's getting to know people from the mainland and how they felt about the government. And they were saying this, in Taiwan, or not in Taiwan, in the United States, where they're not, the government over here can't tell them what to say or think when they're abroad, right? And they were telling me opinions saying, no, we believe that things should be run this way because the government is responsible for the people and it should be the guardian of the people. So whereas you may not understand why ideas of, for example, free speech on the internet are a little bit differently understood within China, within mainland China, and the rest of the world. It's just a cultural difference. And I thought, why should there be so-called universal values? I mean, in Chinese culture, for example, parents have their duties to their children, and once children reach a certain age, and they have the obligation to financially support their parents. Now, this may be different from other cultures. In some cultures in the West, for example, kid turns 18, you're on your own, you need to be independent. I'm not going to say what is right or wrong, but I think there are cultures that work for the different societies. So if you try to apply that sort of logic once you're 18, you're on your own, that's not going to work in China. And perhaps China's understanding of taking care of the elderly is not going to be received well in the West. So, and I think the building materials, the building blocks for building bridges between Taiwan and the mainland are already there. Like I said, common language, common culture, and even to this day, we consume a lot of common pop culture. I mean, you were mentioning, especially in the 2000s, how there was a heavy inflow of pop culture music from Taiwan or cinema from Hong Kong. And nowadays, now that the entertainment industry over here is more developed than before, you're seeing a lot of these things being popular in Taiwan, despite the authorities over there being not too friendly right now. I mean, I was when I did my conscription, it was in Nantou, central Taiwan. It was in a more rural area. And whereas in places like Taipei, you're going to see more Western influence, a lot of young people watching Netflix. Over there in Nantou, you're seeing a lot of young people watching TV dramas from the mainland just because of the cultural similarities. So I do think more visiting back and forth will open people's eyes. I'm going to bring another example of my ex again. We went to Yanji a while back, and I think it opened her eyes a bit. I mean, I've never been to Xinjiang, but Yanji is the autonomous Korean prefecture in Jilin province. And she was surprised to see how everything, all the signage was bilingual, first written in Chinese and then in Korean. So at the airport, for example, it said Yanji in Chinese characters, but next to it, written in Korean, was Yanggil.
Yeah, we have several autonomous provinces in China, and in each province, autonomous province like Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, it is required by law that public signs has to be written in 2 languages: Mandarin, the national language, and the Uyghur language, which is the most popular language in Xinjiang. And in Tibet, you will find the same thing. Every public signs will be written in 2 languages: one Mandarin, national language, and then Tibetan language, because that's the most popular language in Tibet. And there are so many other autonomous regions like Guangxi, Ningxia, Guangxi, Yunnan. In those regions, languages there were like dozens of languages in those provinces, because just like in Yunnan, in Guizhou, there are 56 ethnic groups. China has 56 ethnic groups, but Yunnan has everyone. And Guangxi is the same thing. And in Guangxi, in Yunnan, Guizhou, Han is actually the minority in those provinces.
I can believe that.
Yeah, it is. In classes, I talked to so many people in those regions. They're like, Han is the minority here, because in the classes you are overwhelmed by all other ethnic group people, and they are so culturally diverse. They have their own languages, they have own customs, many of them are very good at singing and dancing. So I really encourage people either from Taiwan Island, either from other countries, go to visit those provinces of China as well, because China, when we say Chinese culture, it's not just one thing.
Many different local cultures.
Yeah, Chinese culture itself is just so diverse. I think a lot of Chinese students who are studying in the United States, when I ask them how do they feel about the U.S., many of them say, "Wow, U.S. is so diverse. The culture is so diverse." And I was like, China is diverse. Have you been to Xinjiang? Have you been to Tibet? Have you been to Guangxi, Yunnan, Gansu, in the Mongolia? It's really diverse itself. So we need to understand our own culture first.
Even among Han people, it's very diverse. You
Exactly.
talk to Southerners, and Southerner is even too broad of a category.
Yeah.
You go to some place like, you see Cantonese people, they're Han.
Yeah.
But then they're also very different from the Han people you find in, like Tianjin.
Yeah, like I was born in Heilongjiang province, so I'm a northerner. Northern Chinese and Southern Chinese, we have a beef, but like saying beef is more like we are poking fun at each other. It's like we just like make jokes with each other. So even Han people from Northern China, Southern China have very different living styles. We have very different food. So sometimes I'm trolling with my friend from Shanghai. Oh, why your food is so sweet? And a friend from Shanghai is like, why your food is so salty? Why you Northerners can drink so much? But we're poking fun at each other, and so it's. there are a lot to explore. So really come to explore the mainland.
But you were talking about some of the fear-mongering, and I think it is so believable for some youth in Taiwan, because I think back to the KMT dictatorship days, right? And back when my mom was growing up in Taiwan, if you spoke any regional language other than standard Mandarin, you would get fined, you would be punished, you would have to wear a little sign that says, I love speaking standard Mandarin, I won't speak local dialects. So, I understand the need for the push for a unified standard language, but those weren't the steps or the measures taken on the mainland. That's why it took a little bit longer for standard Mandarin to really spread on the mainland than on Taiwan, which it was done within a generation, but then it created this problem because now it's believable for people in Taiwan that the authorities over here are doing the same things. I was watching a live stream once. Huang Licheng. He was speaking with a YouTuber, and Huang Licheng was born in Taiwan, but he grew up in America, and his family speaks more Taiwanese Hokkien than standard Mandarin. So when he's speaking with his host, he switches back and forth between the two. And some people in the trolls, because he does business with the mainland, so some people think he's a sellout. So then some people are saying like, oh, you're speaking what they call Taiwanese. The mainlanders are not going to like that. And I'm like, where are you getting that idea from? Regional dialects and local languages are flourishing over here.
Exactly. You go to different, even though people from Taiwan speak Mandarin, but if you go to different provinces in the mainland, you encounter dozens of different dialects and languages. I mean, you'll be surprised how diverse the culture is here in the mainland.
You know, I went to Sichuan and I noticed boomers over there, they don't even bother trying to speak standard Mandarin with you. Their understanding is, you know, our Sichuan dialect is close enough to standard Mandarin. You figure it out. Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I think it's very ridiculous that there is this understanding among Westerners that if you love China, that means you have to hate Taiwan, or if you want to love Taiwan, that means you have to hate mainland China. But I mean, I think through the conversation and what we mentioned over so far, that's not very true. And you already spoke quite a bit about how Taiwan was taught in schools. But how about growing up? How was Taiwan portrayed in popular media, for example? I mean, just to bring up one point, I visited Shanghai in 2007. Everywhere I went, like whether it was department stores or whatever, the two songs I heard the most, 黄金甲 by Jay Chou and Mr. Q by Jolin and Tsai Lin.
Who are all singers from Taiwan Island, right? You know, yeah, I mean, in the media, how we were taught about Taiwan is our family. And it's never a stranger, really. Mm-hmm. There might be some people who are very critical of Taiwan because of they heard the separatism, or some people are trying to ignore or neglect or remove Chinese culture from their own culture. So some people are probably mad at that. Mm-hmm. So they will have that negative comments about Taiwan. But it's never targeting the whole Taiwan, people in Taiwan. And like you mentioned, you traveled to different provinces in the mainland so far. Mm-hmm. How were people treating you? Any hostility?
No hostility at all. A lot of just hospitality and curiosity. Yeah. Curiosity at most. Some people will ask me, hey, what do young people in Taiwan think about this, and this? Yeah. Everyone asks different questions. You know, a lot of times they'll say, oh, 欢迎, welcome, welcome.
See?
When I went to Mount Qingcheng in Sichuan, over there you had to make a reservation to visit because it's a national park. And you had to enter your ID information. So once you get there, you have to show your ID. Well, people in Taiwan, when we come over here, we have a Taiwan travel permit to the mainland. So that's the ID that I showed him. And there were a lot of people behind me. It was a very busy time. I'm sure people behind me were kind of upset, but he was like, oh, I've never seen one of these before. Can I look at it a little bit longer? And I'm just like, sure. At the expense of people behind me who were trying to get in.
See, I think that first, that reveals two things. First, there indeed few people from Taiwan are visiting China. So it's so rare for them to see such a card. And second is, they really want to understand you.
Yes.
They really want to know you, and they want to show you that you are welcomed here.
Yes.
Right? I'm sure anyone from Taiwan, if they come here, they will have the same treatment.
Right. And I don't sugarcoat things when people ask about how young people feel about the mainland, but I let them know why things have become the way they are.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's also important for people in China or other places to understand how come we come from the same roots, we come from the same culture, and now suddenly a lot of young generations in Taiwan don't feel related to Chinese culture. They don't feel related to China. What led to that?
I think there's many factors. One of them is just simply the fact that the majority of the people in Taiwan, even though we're descended from the mainland, have been too many generations removed from the mainland. I think there is this understanding among a lot of people unfamiliar with the history that, Taiwan's population mostly came from 1949 when the KMT retreated from the mainland. But that is not true. Those people and their descendants make up about, I think, roughly 15% of the population. The rest have been there for many more generations. My mother was the 6th generation born in Taiwan, 7th generation in Taiwan. And I mean, she identifies as Chinese because that's how she was taught growing up in school and because that was the popular consensus. Now, if you remove that consensus, then it's quite feasible for somebody, say, born in the 90s or the 2000s, growing up, not being taught that, to just kind of feel that distant. Whereas somebody whose grandfather fought in the Civil War and went to Taiwan and would talk to them about, when I was younger, back when I lived in, I don't know, Ningbo or wherever, they feel that sort of connection. So that's one factor, just the generations removed. And the other thing is, in 2000, the first DPP leader was elected, and he was not elected with the majority of the vote. He won less than 40% of the vote because the other camp was split. And he started carrying out reforms to the curriculum in a top-down fashion so that, in America, when you go to school, what are the first things you learn in history class? You learn about the American Revolution. You hear about George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., all of this stuff that helps understand where you as a country came from and where you're headed. And in the past in Taiwan, it was the same thing. We were learning about the different Chinese dynasties, the century of humiliation. Of course, this was taught through a very anti-communist angle, but nonetheless, I mean, the Civil War stuff is less than a century. So it's only a very small part of Chinese history, but the vast majority of your education and what it means to be Chinese was exactly the same. You remove that and then you teach it in a way that implies it's separate, and then you're that many generations removed. Of course, you're going to feel less of an emotional connection with the mainland, especially when, foreign powers are saying, oh no, you are not them, you are you, you're one of the good ones, they're the bad ones. And you live in a society that, for better or worse, has been heavily influenced by the United States. These ideas will have an easier time taking hold. And on top of that, when the KMT first came to Taiwan, they did not handle internal contradictions very well. And the elites from the KMT all happened to come from the mainland, and they treated the people on Taiwan in some ways pretty badly. But it wasn't just like they were targeting Taiwanese people. The people who came from the mainland, who were the soldiers, were also, they kind of got the short end of the stick. But imagine if you lived in Taiwan and then all of a sudden your island is transferred back to China, and then you're governed by a bunch of unelected elites from the mainland for the longest time who were out of touch with the people on the ground. In your mind, you're going to think, okay, these people come from the mainland, they're out of touch with us, they're not good at governing. And these people that they tell us to hate are also on the mainland, and we haven't had too much contact with them, but if this is a good metric to go by, well, they come from the same place, they're probably not too different from one another. It's unfortunately many layers of contradictions, and you have a ruling class in the United States that's very eager to exacerbate these divisions to further their geopolitical aims in this region, because their goal is to make sure that the two sides remain separate. They're not in a place where they can formally support independence, but they want to keep one side more or less within their sphere of influence rather than just letting history run its course. Yeah, so I think I like to explain to people on the mainland, please be a little bit patient with the people on Taiwan, even the ones who are misled, because they're not bad people. If you were put in their shoes, you could very well have very similar ideas. And, some historical wounds take a lot of time to heal. And I believe with better relations, with more bridge building, that can happen within a few generations. I mean, when the Japanese colonized us 50 years, were they able to erase our Chinese culture? They weren't able to do it. You have some young people today who may not feel that they're Chinese, but feeling is one thing. But when the culture that you practice every day is Chinese, it doesn't matter what you call it or how you identify it. It is, if you try to remove Chinese culture from Taiwanese culture, it is like a kamikaze attack. Your own culture is going to go with it, because it is a very integral part of the culture. And now, since we spoke about all of this and we talked about my travels to the mainland, maybe I'll answer the reverse question. But anyways, when travel to Taiwan becomes easier again, what are some places in Taiwan? I guess top five places that you would want to visit.
Wow, so many. Like Riyuetan that
Yes.
I've learned in the first year of my elementary school, I definitely visit. I want to try Jian. And so many. Okay, the first place I need to go is the food street, where they sell all the Taiwan 小吃.
Right. There's food streets everywhere.
I need to try Jian because it's what I learned from TV
Oyster,
dramas, from Taiwan television TV dramas, and
Jian's oyster omelets, by the way.
yeah, and the 乌梅番茄.
Oh,
Yeah, they're sold here as well, but I mean, I need to try that in Taiwan. There's so many food. All I can think about is food.
it's food.
Yeah.
What about places like Tailuge, Tarako Gorge, or
Yeah, and also
Alishan?
Taipei 故宫.
Oh, right. It's kind of, I don't want to say disheartening. I think it is what it is. But when I come to museums over here, historical museums, they'll show things like unequal treaties that were signed. But over here, a lot of them are replicas because the originals got taken to Taiwan during the end of the Chinese Civil War.
Yeah.
Like they'll write, this is a replica. The original is at the Taipei Palace Museum.
Yeah, so I do want to see the Palace Museum in Taiwan to see the real relics that were taken away from the mainland.
You know, it takes 12 years to see everything over there. They rotate the things on display every few months. But if you want to see everything, you have to go multiple times a year over the course of 12 years.
Wow.
There's that much stuff.
Wow. But of course, I need to visit you when
Right.
you're in Taiwan, right?
You have a tour guide when you're there.
Yes.
When
you should.
CGTN goes over there and reports how we can 环岛 take you around the whole entire
I want
island.
to do that, right? Like cycling across Taiwan.
I don't feel like cycling, but you can cycle. I'll drive behind you.
Okay.
And if you get tired, you can put your bike on the car. And I like air conditioning. It's too hot in Taiwan.
Right.
And I guess what has been the most rewarding experience for you over the course of your career? You know, when it comes to, facilitating connections between a foreign audience and Chinese culture and China in general.
I think the most rewarding thing is every day I receive hundreds of messages across platforms from viewers across the world. Sometimes I do my reporting in English, but sometimes I got messages in Spanish. And the viewer, I think he's from Peru, he said, I wrote this in Spanish, just want to let you know how far you have reached, how far your report has reached. And there are some indigenous people from New Zealand who also left messages on my platform and thanking me for standing up for, human rights, for the right side of history. And, also have most of my viewers actually are based in North America, I think. And I read so many messages. For example, one is he said he's a retired veteran who used to go to Vietnam War and who hate communism. But through years of information and also watching content from my channel, he said he totally changed his views from the early years as a veteran fighting communism to now understand communism on China is not what the media has been telling him. So he's
Right.
not anti-China, anti-communism at all now. So I get this kind of messages on a daily basis from people all around the world. So that's really rewarding because by sending these messages, by sending the different sides of stories to your viewers, they change their mind.
Right.
You don't have to be pro-China or pro-socialism or communism. At least you're seeing, you come to a conclusion by yourself by seeing the different sides of story to see, okay, now the Western media have been telling me so many lies about China. And some of them are considering visiting China, even moving to China. I think that made my day.
Right. No, I get similar messages sometimes, probably nowhere near as often as you, but it is very rewarding. Just these issues, especially with global geopolitics and rising tensions between China and the US, Taiwan issue gets brought up a lot, and people want to really understand more nuances. And I think a lot of people understand that they're only getting a one-sided picture with the media. And yeah, it really makes my day when people tell me, hey, they learned so much, and they've I don't even want people to necessarily believe what I believe, but to just take what I have to say into consideration and form their own informed opinions.
Yeah.
So with that, is there anything you would like my audience to know, or where they can follow you? Anything?
So you can follow my Twitter. My Twitter is just my name, Jingjing Li. But Li is my family name. We put our family name in front, but in Western platforms, sometimes I had to do it the other way. So you can find me on Twitter, Jingjing Li, and same name on YouTube. You can find my channel where I will post my interviews with Xiangyu as well. And you can find me on TikTok and Instagram. I also have a weekly newsletter. You can find me anywhere, any social networks, because I just want to send messages to as many people as I can.
Yes. So thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to come on my show.
My pleasure. Come on. I have a friend from Taiwan is visiting here. I'm going to show you the best time.
And I look forward to going on your show in just a few minutes. So with that, I'm going to do my little closing statements over here. I'm going to have to read off a script because I got people to thank. So thank you for tuning in to my interview with Li Jingjing. Hope you guys enjoyed our conversation. And for more talks like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe on your preferred listening platform, as well as on YouTube or Rumble. If you have any feedback or topic suggestions that fit the theme of this podcast, please feel free to send an email to straighttalk@xiangyu.tw. I'd now like to give a huge thank you to my upper level patrons, Alvin Jia, Mecha Patriot, Wang Yijing, Pranav Sima, and Michael Kim. Finally, if you like what I'm doing and want to support me sharing a perspective on Taiwan and beyond that's not covered by mainstream media, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon or making a contribution to any of the links in the show notes. See you guys in the next episode.
还是人情